Okay, this is my cutting board. It's made of bamboo, and I got it kind of cheaply at Bed Bath & Beyond a few years ago. But as you can see, it's dinged. There's a split developing in it right here. It's scratched up. It's not very sturdy. It's not very thick either, but that's not really a big deal. You don't really need to have a thick cutting board. But anyway, I wanted a new cutting board. So with that in mind, I figured, why not make my own? So with that in mind, that's what this particular video is going to be about. So anyway, what I did was I was at our local Home Depot, and it turns out they have maple in 1.5 inch wide strips that 3/4 inch thick, of course, and basically as long as you want to get them. These three pieces I have right here happen to be 7 feet long, and they're surfaced on 4 sides. So that means they're, for all practical purposes, they're ready to turn into a cutting board. Now, this isn't going to be cheap because, well, it isn't going to be like, a $20 project, but I think each of these ran me about $14, $15. And then, it's going to take the time to mill them and other things. So with that, this is not necessarily a cheap do-it-yourself project, but it certainly is a project that you can do yourself. So for that, as far as that goes, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the steps. Now, like I said, these are 7 feet long, and that works out to 84 inches. And you'll notice, oops, let's try that again. And you'll notice I've got some marks on here, and these marks are at the 28 inch mark, 28 inch spot here. And the 28 inches is 1/3 the length of these boards. And there's madness to my method. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut each of these boards into 1/3 lengths, and then I'm going to use these boards, or then I'm going to glue these boards up, and we're going to go on to the next step. Now, again, I'll give you some shortcuts that you can use or some different approaches that you can use, but I'm going to be going kind of all out on this, so or as best I can, because this is the first time I've made a cutting board like this. So anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of sawing tonight, and then I will talk to you later. Bye. Okay, that was quick. Well, but then again, all I had to do was make 6 cuts going, to get all these boards down to the size I wanted them. Now, again, these are 28 inches long. About, I lost a little bit because of, the saw kerf itself, but I've got them in, I've got 9 boards at this point. And I went ahead and let me get a close-up here for you. I went ahead and I sorted them out so you can see the different edge grain pattern that we have on here on each one of them. And at this point, what you could do, if you wanted to just have a simple, very simple edge grain cutting board, you could just make another cut right here, right down the middle, and that would give you, 12 boards, or excuse me, 18 boards, 14 inches long, and it would be about just over a total width of a little over 14 inches wide. So that would give you a pretty good size cutting board, just like that. Then all you would have to do is glue it up, sand the top so it's smooth and flush, trim off the edges, and you'll be good to go. You'll have a cutting board. But what I want to do is I want to make an end grain cutting board. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these boards and I'm going to glue them up with the flat side like this. So I end up having, again, I have 9 boards, 28 inches long, and again, it's going to be about 14 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this up, and then I'm just going to take chunks of each board off as I cut along. And then, you know what? I'll show you those steps as I come to them. Okay, here's the plan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use standard wood glue Type-On 3. It is considered to be food safe. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run beads of glue in between the boards. And then before I put the horizontal clamping pressure in here, I'm going to put some vertical clamps. What I have here are some 2x2 cherry and some big slabs of mahogany that happen to be handy, but I'm going to clamp those vertically. And what that's going to do is give me a chance to make sure that this glue up here is going to be as flat as it can get. Then I'm going to apply the horizontal pressure. So, let me rephrase that. I'm going to put a little bit of horizontal pressure on there, just enough to start pulling the boards together. Then I'm going to put these, the vertical clamps on. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to really tighten down the horizontal clamps. And I also have a couple more sets of clamps than what you see right here. So anyway, I will be back and show you what it looks like here in a few minutes. Bye. Okay, like I said, it was not going to be pretty, but it is doing the job. So anyway, what I did was I wrapped parchment paper around these 2x2 blanks, and I just used a little bit of packing tape on the bottom of these other blanks. These are the ones that are going to be actually contacting the board. I put the parchment paper around just, in case I had any drips or anything. But then these thick mahoganies, these are just rough cuts. If I get a little bit of glue on those, I'm not too worried about it, but I went ahead and put some packing tape on there anyway. So anyway, again, as you can see, I cranked down the vertical clamping as best I could, and then I worked on the horizontal clamping and got 4 clamps going across, 3 clamps going down, and it's doing a pretty good job, I think. There's a couple of high spots on here. There's one right here in particular, but what's going to happen is I'm going to come back with my power sander and I'm going to hit it with probably some 150 grit. Okay, here's what I've done. I went outside and, I sanded this down so it's pretty flat across the width of it. There's a few slightly high spots, like right there. And you can see them much better than you can feel them. And it's not really going to make a difference when we get to the final glue up. But the other thing I did was I squared off the ends of the board. There you go. And now this is, again, as a shortcut, this is something you could certainly do with a handsaw and a miter box. You could take pieces of this, 1 strip wide, even 2 strips wide, maybe even 3, depending on the miter box you got, and cut all these pieces down before you end up gluing them up. But again, I didn't want to have to make dozens of little tiny cuts, cross cuts on here, and then chase down all the blocks and glue them up. So that's why I'm doing this. So anyway, that leads me to the next point, and the next point is the length of this thing. And we're just shy of 27.5 inches, which is fine. We're going to go ahead and we're just going to say 27.25 inches. But now we need to do a little bit of calculation. It's time to break out the mathemancy and figure out just how thick I want this thing to be. Now, I was talking about doing it at 1 and 1.5 inches thick. Another couple of options are, another option is 1 and 3/4 inches thick. But, and I'll get back to, this is important. Every time I make a cut on this power saw, on my table saw, I'm going to lose 1/8 of an inch. So, and if that's the case, then my 1.5 inch thick cutting board is actually going to end up being 1 3/8 inches thick, which is okay. It's going to be just a little thinner than this butcher block table, but it may not be as thick as I want it to be. On the other hand, if I go here with 1 3/4 inches, then of course, I lose 1/8 of an inch, which means I will be approximately 1 5/8 inch thick, which is going to be a little bit over, excuse me, which is going to be a little bit over the thickness that I want, but it's still going to look fine. But that also affects how wide the board is going to be. And when I say wide, I mean, we already know it's going to be, 13 odd inches this way? Yeah, about 13.5 inches this way. So, but the thing is, when I cut these lengths, I'm going to rotate them up. This is only 3/4 of an inch thick, so I'm only going to get 3/4 of an inch in this direction per slice. And let's do a little math. If we have 27¼ inches, and we divide that by, well, 1½ inches, we're going to get up with, well, we're going to come out with 18 plus segments here. And again, remember, if that's the case, we're only going to end up with a 1 3/8 inch thick board. So let's go with the 1 3/4 now. So again, 27¼ divided by 1 3/4. And that's going to equal 15 plus layers at 1 5/8 inches thick. And again, if we have a 15 layers, well, 15 times 0.75 equals, well, it's going to be less than 12. So 12 inches across. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak everything, and I'm going to go with a 1 5/8 inch cut. And that's going to give me 16 plus layers, and 16 layers, well, again, because there's a little bit of offcut on there, but 16 layers times, well, 0.75, equals 12 inches. So I'm going to have a cutting board that's approximately 12 inches by 13 inches. Actually, after I trim it down, it's going to be a little bit smaller than that, but that's the way I'm going to go. So, and again, since I'm losing 1/8 of an inch per cut, that's going to give me a board that's 1.5 inches thick. So that's the plan. Let's see if it works out. Talk to you later. Bye. Okay, hooray for Mathomancy. It actually worked out here. I have got, well, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 cross-cut pieces. And, of course, a little bit left over there. So anyway, let's take a closer look. Like I said, I interspersed the different pieces. So when you take a look at the end grain here, you could see, well, one, it is kind of going up and down, so it's got a good pattern there. But the second thing, of course, is that it's they're varied across the way. So anyway, what's going to happen is I'm going to take each of these pieces, I'm just going to turn it up on end, and here, I'll go as quickly as I can. But anyway, I'm going to turn it up on end, and I'm going to clamp it horizontally, as you see it here. And that is going to give me a good, oops, I don't want that piece. That's going to give me a good, reasonably sized cutting board. It's not going to be large, but it's going to be more than big enough for my purposes. And let's take a look at the size. And like I said, it's going to be 13 wide, and as of right now, at least, a little bit over 12 inches long, or, well, about 13.5 by 12.5, roughly. But again, what I'm going to do is, after I get it all glued up, I'm going to sand it down. Now, another thing I'm going to do, though, is just to mix things up a little bit, I'm going to take every other board, or, well, strip that I have, because these aren't technically boards any longer, and I'm just going to reverse these so I don't have pieces from the same wood, or the same original board, side by side, except for this light strip in the middle. So again, that's going to give me a little bit of variation on the cutting board, and you're going to get to see how it looks. Well, you can kind of get a preview of how it's going to look right now, and you can see the different patterns. Now, one thing I am thinking of doing is setting these up brick style, so they are actually the joints are staggered. That's certainly something I can do, but if I do that, I'm going to end up losing, well, 3/4 of an inch down here, 3/4 of an inch over here. It's going to make the board a little bit smaller. I think, at least this time around, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep the board like that. Now, one thing I do have to be very careful to do is make sure I line up all these seams if I do that. So again, it comes back to, well, you know what, it'll be a little easier to do it this way, of course, but, well, and I think it might look more interesting. Actually, you know what? I think I'm willing to give up that, I think I'm willing to give up that 1.5 there. That would give me well, let's see, that would give me a 12.5 by a 12.5 cutting board. That would be a nice, that'd be a nice square foot cutting board. I think it would look pretty good. So you know what? I think that might be the way to go. I think that is going to be the way to go. So with that, I'll come back in a few minutes after I've got this bad boy all glued up and clamped up. So talk to you in a bit. Bye. All right, here's the glue up. And like you see, like I said, I'm going with the staggered joints. So anyway, I don't have it setting up on the clamps here. I actually have it sitting on the work table here. And that's because I know the work table is a nice flat surface. And what I was trying to do is get one, well, as flat as I could get its surface right here. And then what I will do is I will come back and I will sand this side down very aggressively just to get it even, and then I'll go back and I'll be able to do a light sanding on the other side, minimum amount of work. So I got the clamps on here, and both 2 parallel clamps on there, and then the grippers, and that should end up doing the job. It's in there pretty tight. It just needs to cure for a while now. The of course I got a piece of parchment paper down to protect the work table, and I think, frankly, the grain pattern on there looks pretty good. So I got a couple, like I said, I got a couple of high spots here, but that's okay. Just all I got to do, like I said, is do some sanding. So I will come back and show you this again in a bit. Bye. Okay, here it is. And I'm digging the pattern on it. I'm glad I actually decided to go ahead and do the brick style layout. The only thing that might have made this even a little better would have been maybe putting on maybe putting some walnut or something in there, but I think you can see what's going on with it. So I think it looks pretty good. So anyway, I took it out on the table saw, obviously, and I cut the little half ends off of both sides, and that gave me a board that's about a foot square, about maybe just a touch bigger, but this is a very good size for what I'm going to be doing. So anyway, then took it outside, and I have the luxury of having a belt sander, which means I was able to take this thing down, get all the high spots down, get all the glue, or at least I hope get all the glue marks sanded off. And then I took my random orbit sander, and that's the hand sander. And you could certainly use, just a regular palm sander, but you're gonna want probably a power sander of some sort to do this. Well, anyway, I used that to finish it up. And what I did was I hit the, I hit the cutting surface with 100 grit sandpaper, and then 150 grit, and then I went around on the sides and hit that, which is the 150, and then the edges and the corners, I just took a little sanding pad, which I had laying around here somewhere, but okay, but you could just use plain sandpaper and just knock the very sharp edges. So the next thing up is finishing, and there's a lot of products out there that advertise themselves for cutting board finishing. I mean, you can find cutting board oil, you can find wax and oil mix and things like that. Really, you do not need anything fancy. All you need is just a bottle of mineral oil, and make sure you get the intestinal lubricant stuff. It's the stuff that is used as a laxative. It is food safe. It's completely inert. It will not go rancid on you while you've got it just sitting on the board. And best of all, It's cheap. The cutting board oil is going to run you $7, $8, $10 for a little bottle like this, maybe. You know, a bottle of mineral oil down at at the pharmacy or the grocery store, maybe $2 or $3 or $4, depending on where you buy it. So what I'm doing is going to be a two-part finish, though. First thing I'm going to do is first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to rub some of this on just so you can get a look at it and see just what kind of finish we're going to be looking at when this thing is completely done. And the idea here is to actually give this plenty of oil to just soak into the wood as best it can. And the second thing this is doing, even though I did tack this board off, the second thing this is doing is helping me get rid of some of the sanding dust. And you can see right here just how lovely a color that is. And remember, this is all maple. This is just in-grain maple. So I want this to soak up a lot of this oil. And I'm going to oil all, well, it's a cube, well, kind of. I'm going to oil up all 6 sides of it. So, and once I've done that, I'm going to let the oil just soak in overnight and make sure it stays wet as I can, as I can keep it. And that way it will be ready for the next step. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pause. Well, I'll give you one last look at this. Again, it's not finished. I got a little more work to do tonight, but I'm going to give you one last look at it tonight, and then I'm going to go ahead and pause this, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to show you the next step that I have planned for the finishing. So I will talk to you in a bit. Bye. Okay, here it is. One finished end-grain maple cutting board. And well, you saw how it was constructed in the previous videos, but I have to say, when I did the when I did the staggered seam pattern strip, whatever, however you want to call it, I like the way this looks a lot better. It's much more. I think it's a much more visually interesting than it would have been otherwise. So I'm pretty happy with the way that came out, and overall, I'm happy with the way this came out. It looks really good. I bet it's going to perform very well as well. So anyway, just to let you know what I did as far as finishing it goes. You saw me rub on the mineral oil, which I got right here. And what I did was, over the course of an evening, I put on maybe 6 or 8 coats of the mineral oil. Now, what I would have done if I'd had a bin large enough to put this in, I would have actually dumped the mineral oil in there and thrown this in and let it soak for a few minutes to really soak it up. Again, it's an end grain. The end grain is what's showing here, and that will just pull the mineral oil right through into it. So, but what I did was I came out using a rag. I just poured some mineral oil on it, gave it a very liberal coat, and then went back and played a ranked battle or something, and then came back out and just rubbed more in if it looked dry, and it was soaking it up pretty well. And overall, I'd say I probably used maybe a third of the bottle, maybe a little bit more. I'm not sure. So now with that, you're probably asking yourself, or maybe asking me, dude, there's something wrong with your mineral oil. What's going on there? Well, that's the second part of this that I want to talk about. What I did was I took the mineral oil and I put it into a hot water bath, a very hot water bath, because what I needed to do is get the mineral oil up to about 135, 140 degrees. And the reason for that is this, and what this is, I don't know how well you can see it, it's beeswax pellets. And when I got the mineral oil warm enough, what happened was the beeswax pellets that I put in the mineral oil melted into the oil. Now, you don't really need a lot. You definitely don't need as much as I have here. This is going to end up being a lifetime supply unless I start making a lot of cutting boards. But I'd say I probably had about 2/3 of the bottle left over, so maybe about 10 ounces. And by volume, I mixed in about 1/4 of that, maybe 1/5 of that, somewhere around there, of the beeswax pellets. And then what I did was I just let the oil get hot enough, well, warm plus enough, that the wax melted, made sure it was shaken up very, very well, and then I poured it onto the cutting board. Now, after I did that, I just again rubbed it on with a rag, and then I walked away from it for a while. And after giving it about an hour to set up, I just came back and I buffed it with some clean paper towels. And you can see the paper towels came off clean, and the board has got a nice luster to it. I think it looks pretty good. And then the only thing I had to do after that was put on some feet that I bought down at the local hardware store. Oh, speaking of which, you can get the beeswax pellets at a hobby store. You can get small blocks of beeswax at a hardware store, although it may not melt as easily, just because it's in a bigger chunk. But you can always grate it down or chop it up if you need to. And then, of course, online, or even at maybe at a farmer's market if you got somebody there selling local honey. But okay, you know what? I digress. I tend to do that. So anyway, like I said, pretty happy with the way it turned out, and unless you all want some kind of fashion photo setup picture with it, oh, who am I kidding? Of course you do. I'll be right back. Okay, there you go. There's the money shot. You happy? All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.